Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Revolution 250 podcast. I am Bob Allison. I chair the Rev 250 Advisory Group. We are a consortium of about 70 plus groups in Massachusetts planning ways to commemorate the beginnings of the American Revolution. And our guest today is Alexandra Riley. Aly Riley is a historian, filmmaker, and she has just finished a book called Spies, which is about women spies in the Revolution. Aly, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I should say you're also working on a film about the women spies in the Revolution.
I am, yes. I'm hoping to bring Spies out to the world even further besides the book, and hopefully bring it to either maybe Netflix, History Channel, get the word out about this book.
Very good. So how did you get into doing this as a research project?
Well, when I was a student at Monmouth University, I graduated there with grad school about 3 years ago. And one of my projects for my professor was that he said you could do any project you want on the American Revolution for your final paper. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's the Boston Tea Party, a general, anything you like. He said, pick something. So I said, well, I'm going to skim through the book, see if there's anything that piqued my interest. And I found the Culper Spy Ring, and a lot of it was based on Long Island, where my father's family's from. So then after I did that, I saw Anna Strong, and I was like, I wonder if there are more women spies that helped to either both the British or the American cause. And there were so many more that I found. I said, I want their stories told because nobody's told them before. I didn't even know about them. And I've been studying American history since I was 13, and I'm 30.
Wow.
And I had no idea.
Yeah. So we're always learning new things. So tell us a bit about how the Spies, how these women operated. What was their role? If you can pick one or two and just tell us their story, that might be one way of getting into this.
Well, there was some that happened before the American Revolution. So in 1773, during the Boston Tea Party, Sarah Bradley Fulton helped build a field hospital in Boston Common, and she was able to sneak back and forth with her sister, with some other female citizens, and she pulled it off so well. George Washington actually sent her a letter of thanks, and I thought that was really interesting. And this was before even he was appointed to be the Continental Army general. And then I noticed that Lydia Darrah from Philadelphia and Anna Strong on Long Island were very similar. They both had soldiers that invaded their homes, and they both found, even though their stories are a little different in terms of how they help spy, they both had soldiers in their homes. So Lydia Darrah, General Howe invaded in Philly, and she actually hid in the linen closet because the soldier said, you need to go to bed. We don't want to hear anything. But she went in the closet and hid, pretending to go to bed or pretending to put laundry away, when in reality, she wrote everything down. And her son was serving under George Washington. So she pretended the next morning to go get flour. And of course, the British letter saying, you know, she's trying to feed her family, whatever. She brought the note to her son, and they were able to flee. So the attack on White Marsh really never happened. And then Anna Strong did the laundry line. When they would sail across the Long Island Sound, she would put up different colored petticoats to say, go to this cove, go to that cove. So they're a little different, but they're still so amazing.
Interesting. They are fascinating stories. And as you said, they're not really well represented because A, they're conducting espionage, so they're not writing down what they did. And B, of course, they're women. So how do we find out what their role is of people who are doing something so clandestine?
I mean, I had a lot of research to do. When I looked up on JSTOR, which is what Monmouth's student services and all that, and I looked up female spies in the American Revolution, there was a entry by a man named Henry Darrah. They said no relation to Lydia. I am not sure about that, but it said he witnessed her doing all of that. And then I'm not exactly sure how they met Anna Strong on Long Island. I think it was Robert Townsend because they lived Oyster Bay, which is Nassau County. And then Anna Strong lived in Setauket, which is Suffolk County. And he contacted Caleb Brewster, who would sail across the Sound, and he would see her petticoats. And that's how he knew where to go and what to do.
So, and you're also trying to work on a feature film about this.
Yes.
As well. You formed Under the Horizon Productions.
Yes.
And so how is that going? How's that process?
It's going good. I am meeting with a film pitch deck woman on Thursday afternoon to help me get that going, and then help me hopefully distribute it to either Netflix, History Channel. I'm working on the whole outline of how I want it to look. So that's what's been going on right now.
Very good. Did anyone else in your cohort in graduate school have they turned their projects into books?
Not that I can find, no. I know actually, now that when you mentioned when we first met about Point Pleasant, my friend Colin, who I went to grad school with, he's a teacher at Point Pleasant High School.
Very good.
So a lot of them stuck with it, a lot of them didn't. So I don't know if any of them were as involved as I am, because I know they loved it. I mean, I had great professors at Monmouth. I have nothing bad to say about any of them. So I don't know if any of them. Yeah, I mean, they were all so good.
I'm sure they'll be glad to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, the professor I had for American Revolution, I mean, he was a gem. He really is. And then I'm still in contact with a lot of my professors I went to Ocean County College for my associates, Keene Ocean for my bachelor's, and then Monmouth for my master's. The history professor I had at OCC said, I'll order some copies for my history club. Come and talk about it.
Very good.
So I was like, okay. I said, you tell me when in the spring semester and I'll be there.
Good. So let's talk a little bit about the cult perspiring, because that's, of course, become famous with the TV show Turn. And Brian Kilmeade did a book about the cult perspiring. So
right. I did read Brian's book, and I did cite a little bit of his book in my book. Turn, I finally got to watch it as I was doing my research, and I was like, it is crazy just to see how everything was around, like where my father grew up. I'm like, and he goes, oh, I know that place. I know that place. I'm like, yeah. But it's amazing how that show that like nobody really picked up on doing a lot of research into more of what the women did. I mean, I give credit to a lot of the men. You know, my father was an Air Force vet, so I commend like all the soldiers. But I'm like, there's so much more that needs to be told.
That's very true. Well, we find that with everything involving the revolution, that there's a lot more to be told. And Washington had a real understanding of the importance of espionage in this.
He did. I mean, they did call him America's greatest spy master, and he actually had somebody named oh my goodness, his name just went out of my head, but he was originally the head of the cult perspiring. His name was Nathaniel Sackett, and he was paying him like $50, but it really wasn't that great. So he said, well, you know what? I'm not going to deal with him anymore. I'm going to let him go. And he heard about Benjamin Talmadge, who was best friends with Nathan Hale.
Right.
And when he heard that they had that connection, he said, you know what? I'm going to try to bring in Talmadge to see if he can do it. Talmadge rallied some of his friends from Long Island. And that's how the cult perspiring came to be. He got him. They knew Robert Townsend. They knew Caleb Brewster. They had Austin Rowe on Long Island. He had a bar that he overheard everything going on. Robert Townsend had a bookstore in the city. And of course, you know, they're really not going to say, but he didn't want his identity known. And I've always wondered why. That's the one thing I've always wondered. Yeah.
You're on both sides. And there's allegations James Rivington might have been involved, might not have been involved. This is it's really interesting. And then James Fenimore Cooper, of course, had a great novel, The Spy, and it's about a guy who's really hated by his neighbors. They don't realize the service he had done during the Revolution. They thought he was a traitor, but he'd actually been performing this valuable service during the war. And so then Washington, when he does visit Long Island during his grand tour, makes a point of going to these places to meet with some of these folks who had been involved in the cult perspiring, and kind of secretly still, but acknowledging their role in this. Could Washington have? Well, Nathan Hale's an example of when things go wrong. He's captured and hanged. Are there others you find that get captured?
There was nothing that I could find. And speaking of Nathan Hale, what I found interesting when I did my research, and I mentioned it in the book, there were a lot of theories that Nathan Hale's own cousin was the reason behind his hanging. That they said that Nathan went to Harvard, his cousin went to Yale, and he was fighting for the British at that time, but they're claiming, no, he had nothing to do with it. And when I was doing my research, it just came up all of a sudden, like right when I was at the end of my book, I kept saying, is there any more little tidbits I can add? And when I looked up Nathan Hale, supposedly there was an article from the New York Times in it from 1976. And I'm like, why is this just coming out now? Where was this the entire time I was in graduate school? The entire time I was writing everything.
Right.
So I always wondered, but I couldn't find anything else of being hanged. But I'm curious if there were. And they said, sadly, his body's never been found. No one knows where it is. They do have an epitaph of him in Connecticut. I mean, who knows where that body could be?
Who knows? Well,
it's buried somewhere in Manhattan. God only knows where.
Well, now, 355, there's speculation whether or not this person existed. Was she a spy? Who was she? You talk about her in your book at 355. And who do you think she was?
I think people were shocked when I said who I believe it is. And I believe it was Peggy Shippen, Benedict Arnold's wife.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now,
a lot of people were stunned when I say that.
Why would you think that, since she lived in Philadelphia? What's she doing hanging out in New York?
Well, a lot of the research I did was that the one book that I read, it said that she had a degree of social prominence and she was very close with the Tories and on the Redcoats. So I was like, okay, that can help a little bit. And then Benedict Arnold like fought at West Point, but there's a lot of people think I'm wrong about it, but I'm like, look at the clues. But the one thing that gave it to me, I remember reading that they said she feigned distress to Washington because after John Andre was captured, and she hated him. When John Andre was captured, Washington went to go visit the Arnold compound and couldn't find him, but she was there going into hysterics, pretending she didn't know where he was. She obviously did know where he was. But the article...
actually, I think Washington is already there. And when Andre is captured, and she's already in hysterics because her husband has left. If I'm remembering correctly.
The one journal article I found on JSTOR, the one bit that I read about her, I was like, this is what did it for me. It said Peggy Shippen was known to go through hysterics and had anxiety her whole life. So I'm like, did she have some sort of maybe the first case of mental illness in the colonies that no one knew about?
I think
and
there
that
probably
maybe
were earlier cases of mental illness in the colonies.
Right. And from what I could find, I couldn't find anything of it. I'm sure there is maybe out there, but when I'm reading this, I'm like, well, and plus before that, Shippen and Washington had never met.
No.
So I'm like, okay, well, that could be something like, he didn't really know. Like, he didn't know that Lydia Dower was helping him. He eventually knew of Anna Strong helping him, but he didn't know that there were others.
So
sure that's why.
Little skeptical, though, that someone who goes into hysterics is really cut out to be a spy.
Right. I mean, she had a very strong knowledge of invisible ink, like the Culper Spy Ring did. She was known to sneak around. I mean, nobody's going to bother a woman, especially if there's like men around her. So I'm convinced.
Okay. Who is Anna Strong? Well, can we talk about her a bit?
Anna Strong was she was a housewife on Long Island. Her husband was fighting in the war. They had 10 children, and she had to stick around, take care of them, of course, while he was gone. And the British didn't invade her home. I don't know if it was still during the Quartering Act. I believe it was, but they just like ignored her as if like, she was taking care of her kids. They didn't expect her to do any sort of activity, or when they saw her hanging the petticoats and doing laundry, that's what they thought she was doing, when in reality, because I don't think unless you have like a telescope, you could see from her house to the Long Island Sound where Caleb Brewster would sail.
So how would then, I mean, it seems like you'd have to have a pretty good telescope to be out on Long Island Sound looking at this woman's laundry line.
Oh, yeah. So Caleb Brewster must have had a really good viewing of her house with that telescope, because it's evident that they didn't catch him or her. So they just assumed she was doing her laundry with all the petticoats that she had. Okay.
And so where, can we just talk geographically, where are we in Setauket in relationship to Manhattan, where the British are?
Setauket to Manhattan is about maybe like a 30 to 40 minute drive.
But they weren't driving.
But they weren't driving. So they had to do like, I'm not really sure at the time how they got there. I would assume by walking or horseback.
Or by boat.
Or by boat, yeah, because they had like no cars back then. So how Caleb Brewster was able to avoid capture was incredible. But they really had nobody on the waters.
No.
It was mostly on land where everybody was.
Did any spies get captured?
Aside from Nathan Hale, I couldn't find anybody that did. I mean, I always wondered, God forbid, what it would have happened to them if, like, say, Lydia Dower in her closet, if she made noise, that would have been it. And it was easy to, like, fool the British with the laundry line because they knew she had 10 kids. So they're like, okay, well, we're not going to question anything. She's got a lot of kids. She's got a lot of laundry. Makes sense.
And didn't Anna Strong's husband get captured, and wasn't he imprisoned on one of the ships in New York Harbor, the Jersey, I think it was?
There were a lot of different theories about that. Some say that there weren't, others say that they weren't. Then they said that 355 was captured and gave birth, but back to Brian Kilmeade, he said he couldn't find anything on that because they said that she would bring him dinner, but they said women were not allowed on the ships.
Interesting.
So in Brian Kilmeade's book, from what the research I did, he said that can't be true.
Okay, so there are no women allowed on the ships, but yet there's this myth that there is this woman, mystical spy, who's actually giving birth on.
Yeah, they said that there was a myth that a woman was captured and that she was giving birth to either, I think it was like Robert Townsend's child, but they said no, the women were not allowed on those prison ships.
And who is Robert Townsend, and how's he caught up in all of this?
Robert Townsend had a home on Long Island in Oyster Bay. I've actually visited there right before the pandemic hit. And he also had a shop in Manhattan that he owned. I think it was a bookstore, but I could be wrong on that one. And for some reason, I don't know why, but he never wanted his identity known. He never wanted.
If he's a spy, why would he want his identity?
Right. And there were a lot of rumors saying that he was in love with 355, but no one could ever really prove that. I said, but was he in love with her, or was he in love with what she did? Because he didn't want to be known.
Okay. If in fact, I mean, Anna Strong's another candidate for 355, but there's also speculation that there might not have been a 355.
Right.
One letter from 1779 that mentions a lady 355, and that's
right. Because when I went to George Washington's Mount Vernon and looked at like the code book, it said 355 means lady agent, agent lady. So they said it could be somebody who didn't exist. It could just be somebody who helped them out, or like you know, when I went to Three Village and East Setauket at the museum that's there now, and they said it could just be anything. They said it doesn't have to mean anything. It could just mean that. Then they said Anna Strong had no code name, so she wasn't really technically formally involved. I'm not really sure how they all met her, but she still did help in a lot of ways. I mean, if she didn't have that laundry line with the code numbers, Brewster wouldn't have known what to do.
Right. I wonder, Aly, if we can just talk a bit. We're talking with Aly Riley, who has written a book, She Spies, about women spies in the Revolution, and is working now on a feature film about this. And I wonder if we could just talk a little bit about how spycraft worked at the time of the Revolution. We may have a certain image of, you know, people with secret codes and so on. How would they gather information? How would they then get it to the other side? Can you just talk a little bit about the techniques people might have had?
A lot of them did invisible ink. When I went to the museum in East Setauket, they were teaching us how to write in invisible ink, like with lemon juice. And that was like a lot of it. I'm not sure how exactly they were able to read the letters, but there was like a lot of invisible ink.
I think you'd hold it up to a flame, and then that would show through.
Yeah, I think that's what we did. I think they had like candles lit, and then they showed us what to do, and then we like kind of waved it around the candle flame. But they did like a lot of codes. They wrote in secret numbers and letters. And like I said, the other part of the spycraft, like I said, with the laundry line, or sometimes your ears are your best tool.
So that would then require you, though, then to get through the enemy lines to report this. So the British are occupying New York. We have to get information from New York somehow out of New York, and then somehow to Washington's army without anyone on the other side knowing this is what we're doing.
Right. I mean, I'm not really sure exactly how some of them used it. I mean, like most of it really wasn't invisible ink, I think, until the Culper spy ring was formed, because like I said, Sarah Fulton during the Boston Tea Party really didn't use any. She just snuck around with her sister and her friends.
Yeah,
and
as you said, ears are your best weapon.
Right. I mean,
and there was James Jay, I think, was somehow involved. He was John Jay's brother, and he developed a recipe for invisible ink that they were using in the Culper spy ring.
Right. And that, I think, was a lot of big help, because, like, you know, and I'm not exactly sure what was on the dock. I think there was I went to the New York State Museum back in October, and there was a letter in full penmanship, or when they used the feather pens back then, of the documents that John Andre had when he was captured. That was not an invisible ink. No. And I think also that's what did him in. That was not an invisible ink, because I have a picture of the note that was written. I'm like, yeah, that's not invisible ink. That's like, say, if we were using a pen today.
Sure. And the guys who captured Andre didn't know how to read, so they had to send these messages on to someone else.
Yeah.
They also, I understand, would hide things in buttons, but Andre's were actually hidden in his boot.
Right.
And so when they had made him strip, they found these documents hidden in a false heel in his boot, which was what did him in.
I definitely think that's what did him in. I mean, they
Yeah.
had to get creative because if you didn't,
because, if
you're
you're
done.
captured, you see
You're
what
done.
happened with Nathan Hale. Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
And Nathan Hale, the problem with Nathan Hale was he brought his actual birth certificate with him when he went from Connecticut to New York. I'm like, that's what your problem was.
Right, right. I know the Clements Library out in Michigan has a mask letter that is you hold something over the document and then that reveals what do you find anyone using that kind of technique where you have the person on the other side has the same kind of frame they can use to eke out what the letters are or get out what the letters are?
I wasn't able to get out to Michigan. I did a lot of like their archives online because right when I started this was like right before COVID hit. So I was trying to do all around here. I did Mount Vernon. I did a bunch of Long Island. I went to Philly. So it was kind of hard to get, but I did do a lot of their online work. I would love to go see that though.
Did you go to the Spy Museum in Washington?
I did. They were not happy with my research.
Why is that?
They don't believe who I believe Agent 355 is. They have when you go to the second floor and right off the elevator, it's the whole Cooper Spy ring. I have the pictures and they immediately say Anna Strong is 355. They will not budge on it. I'm like, I wrote the book. I did my research on it. I did go there I went during the pandemic once museums were open safely again. So my parents and I took a drive down there. They don't want to listen to me. Like I was in an email with the director. I was in an email with all I'm saying. I would love to do a talk when the book comes out. They don't want to budge. Because it's such a nice museum. It really is. It was my first time there. But they just don't want to budge.
Well, I think your first time visiting a museum probably is not the best time to tell them they're wrong. But
yeah, like when I went to Three Village on Long Island, the woman, she was nice, but the problem with her was that she didn't want to go by facts. She just wanted to tell you what she knew. And she kept saying, well, what does our master's student think of this? I'm like, no offense, but you're wrong on a lot of stuff. I said, I'm going for the degree. I've studied this since I was 13. You're giving your own opinion. You're not giving what actually happened. Like they have a picture of Benjamin Franklin there. And I'm like, look, I respect Benjamin Franklin as a founding father, but he had nothing to do with this. Why do you have his picture in here? And she's going on. And I'm like, that never happened. Benjamin Franklin had nothing to do with the spy ring. He was ambassador to France. I get that. If you want to, that little bit you had there, I said, that part's right. But the rest of it, I'm like, he had nothing to do with this. Yes, he was ambassador to France at this time. I know that. That you're right on. The rest of it, you're not. She did not want to believe me. And I'm like my mother's with me and she's like calming me down. She's like, don't yell. Don't. I'm like, I'm going to yell. I'm going to yell because he had nothing to do with it. As soon as we got in the car, I started ranting to her. And I'm like, and she's like, yeah. She said she would rather you give you her opinion rather than what actually happened. And she said, what lies is she telling kids who want to learn history? She said, kids visit here all the time. What is she telling these poor kids? Like my niece, my 10-year-old niece, she goes, I want to do history day like you do. I want to get involved in a couple of years. And I was like, yeah, but I'm going to tell you the right stuff. I'm not going to tell you that stuff.
I know that, we do see other places where we have these espionage networks working in one way or another. The culprit spy rings become famous for a lot of good reasons. I know here in Massachusetts, in Marshfield, that someone said, actually people of color acted as spies there because, again, as with women, they're able to pass through lines without people suspecting anything. They have this guy, something else that is they're there for a reason, just like Anna Strong's going to buy flour. Someone's going to buy flour, and these folks are going to do other things. So that might actually be an advantage for women to be operating as spies because they're under the radar.
Right. And it led the way to women in the Civil War, too. Yeah. There was some women in the Civil War that did. Like there was Belle Boyd and a couple others. And I was thinking about maybe either doing a sequel to that or just doing by itself on maybe female spies in the Civil War.
There's certainly a great topic. And, you could actually continue on into the 20th century, 21st century. It is. And so we're talking with Aly Riley, who is an historian and filmmaker and has been doing work on female spies in the Revolution. Her book is She Spies, Women in the American Revolution. Now, did you find any in the Southern colonies? Did your gaze go that far, or were you focused more on metropolitan New York?
Well, I did focus up here on the East Coast. There was one that I found. Her name was Emily Geiger, and she was a young teenager, about 17, and she had to bring a message to Nathaniel Greene, but she got caught in the crossfire. So what she did was, I thought, if I were 17 and doing that, I'd be panicking. I'd be like, I'm going to die. But what she did was that the note she had, she ripped it up and ate it, but she memorized the message. So then when Nathaniel Greene's cohorts checked her, they're like, well, there's nothing on her. We got nothing to hold her on. She made the excuse that her friend had given birth and that she was going to go meet her and the baby, when in reality, she went to Nathaniel Greene's camp and brought the message. And I thought, 17 years old, I mean, she could have lost her life, and she thought of the most ingenious thing she could think of was just to eat the note but memorize it, and she did. And it saved her life.
And probably saved Greene from whatever the British were planning.
Exactly. I mean, that was so incredible that she did that. There was nothing else Southwise I could find as much. But I mean, I found Anne Bailey. She was in West Virginia. Her husband was dealing with Lord Dunmore in 1774. So she did some spying of her own out there. She didn't do much. Also in New York, there was Anne Bates, who worked with the British. And she pretended to be a peddler in White Plains. And she actually got away with it 3 different times. Because like I said, if you're a woman, you're not going to be caught.
So there are also women spying for the British against the Americans.
There was Anne Bates. She was, and of course, Peggy Shippen, as we all know, because of who her husband was. But yeah, I liked Anne Bates. I just couldn't believe that she was able to pull it off 3 different times.
And what happens to her after the war?
They said her husband, after the Battle of Charleston, he just decides to leave the war for good and just, they really live a quiet life. Yeah, they didn't really do much. They said, like, that was all she felt that she needed to do. The one thing I got was, I put it in the book, that an article I found that they called Anne Bates the most powerful spy of the Revolution. I'm like, not in my opinion, no. I was like, it's brave that she did it 3 different times. And of course, being a woman, she wouldn't get caught. But to call her the most powerful, that's a bit of a stretch to me.
Who would you say is the most powerful?
Well, definitely, of course, Agent 355 for what she did, but also like the fact that Lydia and Anna both had spies in their houses, and that fact that they were able to get away with everything they did, with the British literally being behind their backs in their own homes. I mean, the fact that Lydia Dower was able to write down everything she heard behind her closet and able to sneak out, give her son the note, and then they all flee White Marsh, and the British were stunned. And they said, where'd everybody go? And little did they know that it was her the whole time.
Interesting.
I mean, it amazes me.
Well, Bates is given credit for influencing General Clinton to send the British fleet to support Newport when Sullivan and the Comte de Grasse were there. So that's actually a big move. It helps the British hold on to Newport.
Right.
And she was given a pension by the British.
Yeah. But I mean, it is amazing.
Do you find that any of the American women you've been looking at got pensions or got some kind of a recognition for their work?
Aside from George Washington giving them the letters, like thanking them for what they did, I couldn't find anywhere where they got any money, which kind of stunk. I mean, the thing that you did so much to help them not be wiped out, especially Lydia Dower and Anna Strong. I'm like, they saved your lives. They saved a complete wipeout, and the revolution could have ended sooner than we thought.
That's true.
I mean,
on the other hand, one of the big problems was an inability to pay soldiers and
that's true. Like they had like the beer rations, they had the food ration. I mean, like think of Valley Forge winters.
Right. Sure.
So
we've been talking with Aly Riley, who is a writer, filmmaker, and historian, author of She Spies. By the way, you also cover the New York Rangers for a blog called Sports as Told by a Girl, a podcast.
My hockey team for life. I do.
We won't hold it against you.
I know. I mean, my mother and I were watching the Bruins last night. I know. I mean, I've been, even before my mother's last game, she was 3 months pregnant with me.
Wow.
I have been trying to get her to go back because this year is 30 years since their cup. I am 30. I want it again. It hurts.
Well, good luck with that.
I can only hope. I mean, I go to a few games a year. My father gets Veterans Affairs discount on tickets. So like we go a few times a year and I'm like, I need it. I need that cup. I mean, like the last cup, I was 9 months old. June of 94, I was 9 months old. And I'm like, there's a big silver shiny thing. And I don't know what that is at 9 months. So every time they re-air it, we watch it all the time.
Okay.
I miss it.
You'll come up to Boston in June and we'll give you a glance at the cup.
I did. I see the cup when I went to the Rangers Winter Classic in 2018 at Citi Field in Queens. I actually got a picture with the cup.
Oh, really? Oh, very
good. They had the cup out for all the fans to see. And I'm like, come back to the Garden, please. Come back to Madison Square Garden. Should have won it in 14. I'm still mad about it, but.
Well, we've been talking with Aly Riley, who has written Spies about women in the American Revolution and is hoping to turn this into a major motion picture. So, Aly, it's been great to talk to you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you guys so much for having me.
And good luck. I want to thank Jonathan Lane, our tireless producer, the man behind the scenes, and our listeners. We do have listeners all around the world, and every week I thank some. And if you're one of these places, send Jonathan Lane an email, jlane@revolution250.org, and he'll send you some of our Rev 250 gear. And this week, our friends in Federal Way, Washington, in Houston, and in 3 places here in the Commonwealth, Waltham, Peabody, and Jamaica Plain, Dundalk, Maryland, Lidditz, Pennsylvania, Caldwell, Idaho, Cresskill, New Jersey. Is that near where you are, Cresskill?
I'm not sure where that is. No.
Okay. Shelburne, Vermont, Steubenville, Ohio, and in the free and Hanseatic city of Hamburg. Thank you all for joining us. Those places in between and beyond. And now we will be piped out on the road to Boston.